Hey, it's Aldo Gandia to let you know that we have some really cool Grobstein Schuster's Own t-shirts, and you can win one if you stump the grobber. All you got to do is call 224-202-6234 and leave a voicemail with a question that you think Grobstein won't be able to guess the answer to. Something Chicago sports, like name all 7 hockey players for the Blackhawks who have had their jersey retired. Again, call 224-202-6234, and if you ask a question and Grobstein can't answer it during the show, you win a really cool Grobstein Schuster's Own t-shirt. Hey, and don't forget to tell us your name, mailing information, the size of the t-shirt you want, and the contest is only open to those in the continental United States. The number again, 224-202-6234.
Some may find the following disturbing. Discretion is advised.
You unlock this sports talk show with the key of knowledge. Beyond it is another dimension, a dimension of sight.
Kyle Hendricks, that was probably the second best game he's ever pitched. Now, he was outstanding, a complete game. He was the first Cub pitcher to pitch a complete game shutout since Bill Bonham.
I was at that game in 74.
Of course you were. That's 46 years ago.
A dimension of sound.
I was interviewing some players, and Fergosi walked by, and he said something with the F word, well, fuck this, blah, 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 blah. And I said, as we continued to talk, I said, little does he know, I'm going to go ahead and play that. In other words, I'll bleep it out. And he heard me, and he says, little do you know, I don't give a shit.
A dimension of mind.
A bunch of things about Tom Thibodeau, though. You knew that he was very secretive. In his very first game, it was a preseason game, and it's like 6:45, and the tip-off is at 7:30, and we're asking him out in the hallway, can you give us your starting lineup? He wouldn't do it. Okay, so he was setting the tone right then and there. In the very first preseason game, you're not even going to tell us who your starting lineup is? Wow, you're a little off your rocker when it comes to that kind of stuff.
You're entering a land of both debate and accord. A battle of wits. You've just crossed over into the Grobstein and Schuster zone.
And welcome into the Grobstein Schuster Zone, episode number 7. Les, that was the number I always wore on my Chicago Radio All-Star shirts.
Yes, you did indeed. And we still have a lot of pictures of that on grobber.com, but that's another story for another day. I like the shirt you got on, though.
Well, this is a shirt that you can read it. Well, actually, this is audio, not visual, but we'll get to that eventually also. It is the official T-shirt. And what we've done also, for people who call in, and we'll do this segment a little bit later on, people who are able to stump the grabber will win a T-shirt. Do we have enough of those, Aldo?
No.
We'll print them up.
I was going to ask you if you had some for sale down the road.
Oh, yeah, we will.
There'll be a lot for sale down the road, unless we even have one for you before you leave here a little bit later.
I just got to get one for Kathy, too.
Okay, we'll do that. We are recording this on Monday, unless the big story right out of the chute here is this going to be the shortest baseball season of all time? Because the news this morning is that the Phillies-Baltimore game scheduled for this evening in Miami has already been canceled. The Marlins-Orioles game in Miami has been canceled due to the virus. Already have a big effect, as apparently 14 different members of the Marlins organization, while they're in Philadelphia, came down with the virus. And unfortunately, they now have to be quarantined in the city of brotherly love for the next 2 weeks. So the offshoot of that is that the Marlins are going to be a handicap ball club. Maybe the Phillies will also have to, have the same thing happen to them. And this is a scary situation, Les. Again, this Major League Baseball has got a big decision on its hand. We're recording this Monday morning. Maybe by Monday afternoon, the season could be over, or they might have some kind of resolution. I don't know.
There's so many weird things going on, not only with this, but what's going on with the Toronto Blue Jays. They're not allowed to, and people have been asking me, how come all the NHL players are allowed to stay up in Canada? That's because they're not going back and forth across the border. In the case of the Blue Jays, they would have to cross the border into the U.S. and then back into Canada and back into the U.S. and back into Canada, and they can't do that. The hockey players, they're already, as we speak, already up in Canada, either in Toronto or in Edmonton. And people wondered why Chicago and Las Vegas did not get those games. That's because they would have to also go up there and quarantine and do everything else. Once they're already up in Canada, which is not as big of a hassle as it is down in Florida or Arizona or California or Texas, they can go ahead and be up in Canada, and they're going to play these games. And we know the Blackhawks are going to end up playing against the Edmonton Oilers down the road. First, they're going to play the Blues. Now, as far as what's going on with baseball, we don't know what the hell's going to happen here down the road, because this is all in the Eastern Conference. The Phillies, the Blue Jays, who are in the East, and there's so many others there that are in that. The Marlins, obviously, these are Eastern teams, and the Marlins are in Florida, which is a big-time problem right now. Anything down in Florida is just not good.
No, it's not. And again, as we record this on Monday, by the time some people might listen to this on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, who knows? Maybe there's a resolution. Who knows? Maybe the season's already canceled. I mean, I don't know. It's a lot of people were fearful that something like this could unfortunately happen, and now here we are. And I don't know, Les. I mean, it's so depressing. That sports has been so affected, and it's affected me, it's affected you, obviously it's affected almost everybody in this country. It's just a damn shame.
And this is right after they had increased the amount of people in the playoffs. When you and I were growing up, there were only 16 teams, period. 8 in the National, 8 in the American League before the first before the first expansion in 1961, and that's when the Mets and the Astros, then called the Colt 45s, came in 62. But what we're talking about right now is 16 teams in the playoffs, and I'm one of those that think it sucks. It's cheapening the game of baseball. I don't like it. And the only reason they're doing it is to make money. They're trying to make extra bread. And unfortunately, that whole thing is going to blow up in their face, because if there's no games and the whole damn thing gets blown up and banged, and the season is out the window, it's not going to matter how many teams they plan to put in the playoffs.
100% on all of everything that you just said. Let's hear from some of the members of the Cubs, from David Ross, Anthony Rizzo, and Wilson Contreras, because we talked to them over the last day or so about, now the Cubs, after having played the first 3 games at Wrigley Field, are opening up a series as we speak, Monday evening now, in Cincinnati. And the Reds also had an outbreak of the virus affecting their clubhouse. So let's hear from David Ross. He himself says he doesn't have any worries about this.
We have young guys that have great leadership in front of them, all over the place. This group is a good group to lean on, and I trust these guys. And they understand they're here to play baseball. And I've seen nothing but that 100% focus from these guys.
Anthony Rizzo, meanwhile, is a little fearful going into Cincinnati because of the outbreak of the virus that has already affected the Reds.
Definitely, we were just talking about it. Some of the guys, we're going to just make sure all the protocols are followed very strictly there. Obviously, we can control here and how well all of our Cubs employees and staff have been doing on protocols, and I don't know how the rest of the league's doing, but it's definitely something to be concerned of. If a clubhouse guy went over to their locker room, things like that, making sure that the locker room's deep cleaned. Definitely going to be paying attention to the Tigers now to see if a couple guys pop positive. So a little nerve-wracking, but I'm sure MLB and the Reds will do everything they need to do to make us feel safe there.
And he's referring to the Tigers who played in Cincinnati. And finally, let's hear from Wilson Contreras, who's taking the attitude, you know what, I'm going to wrap myself in a bubble.
We have to find a way to feel ourselves comfortable, to make that room like your second home. I mean, you have to find yourself reading a book or do something inside. I know it's a little weird, but we have to make the adjustment. We have to do something different to keep ourselves safety, and that's all I think. I think we have to find a way to maintain ourselves inside the room.
So Les, all in all, just a scary situation what's going on in baseball, and you know what? football's talking about, trying to get its season together, but if this happens in baseball, boy, I really fear for the football season too.
And not only the NFL, but the colleges too. I mean, they're trying to figure out, for example, Notre Dame might become an official member of the ACC this year. They're talking about the games that they're going to play, and they're going to be against ACC teams like they've been in the past several years, but they're talking about actually have those count as conference games, which means they would be in contention to possibly win the regular season title and compete for a trip to the Orange Bowl that way. But as far as that goes right now, you're talking about so many different things with college football, the NFL, the NHL. Hopefully they'll get the Stanley Cup thing going. And as we speak, the Blackhawks are already up in Toronto, and other teams are up there as well, including the St. Louis Blues, who are the defending champs. And then after that, we got the NBA, and they've had that bubble going on, and it's been working pretty well down there in Florida, in Orlando, and it's worked out pretty well. I still think the one guy who has been pretty much outspoken wanting to make sure they played this year and didn't bang it, and that was LeBron James, because he's trying to win a cheap championship.
Well, we already had Lou Williams from the LA Clippers, who left the bubble, and he went elsewhere, and he's actually caught in a strip club in Atlanta. I don't know what he was trying to...
He's an idiot.
Well, he's an idiot, but he's also potentially screwing up everybody else in that bubble, and now he's got to quarantine for 10 or 14 days. I'm not sure what it is, but, I fear for what's going to happen down there. They're right in the middle of the hot spot in Orlando. That city right now is off the charts. If the NBA pulls it off, boy, I'll tell you what, I'll give them a medal myself. I don't see how that's going to work. Hockey, at least they're up in Canada, where that country has done a much better job than the United States.
Everybody on the planet's done a better job, except for maybe China.
Yeah, maybe. Well, that's true. That's true. Anyway, let's talk real quickly here. Again, 3 games into this. Could be the end of the season for all we know, but 3 games into the season, I was at Wrigley on what was the opener? It was Friday. I was there on Friday.
Boy, Hendricks was almost like another copy of Maddox, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was outstanding. And Kyle Hendricks, that was probably the second best game he's ever pitched. Now, he was outstanding. A complete game. He was the first Cub pitcher to pitch a complete game shutout since Bill Bonham.
I was at that game in '74.
Of course you were. That's 46 years ago. So it's the second best game, because the best game I thought he ever pitched was when the Cubs eliminated the Dodgers in 6 games in the playoffs at Wrigley Field. It was a Saturday night game. He was so good. And again, he only throws mid to upper 80s at best, but he is an absolute pitcher.
That's why he's compared to Maddox.
Yeah.
Maddox was not a fireball either. And some of those pitches were nipping on the corner that Hendricks threw, and I'm thinking, my gosh, that reminded me of Mad Dog.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so anyway, through the first 3 games of the Cubs, they got 2 pretty good performances. Obviously, we just talked about Kyle Hendricks. Tyler Chatwood, who's got great stuff when he's on. Now, the one year when he first came over to the Cubs, he walked everybody in the ballpark. That was his unfortunate problem. But when he's on, he's got really good stuff. The Cubs bullpen still isn't good. I mean, that's going to be ultimately, if the season even continues, that will be their Achilles heel. And I just don't like not having a leadoff hitter. I mean, Chris Bryant, in the long run, probably can do the job, but he's not suited to be a leadoff hitter. I'm just sorry. He's a run producer, and he started off, I think, 0 for 11 or 0 for 12 before he finally got a little cheap hit. So, I don't know. The Cubs have some pluses, but they also have some minuses.
Kind of reminds me of Yelich with Milwaukee. He did hit the home run the other day on Saturday, but he hasn't done squat either.
That's true.
And there have been some other players that have been struggling as well. A lot of big-time stars. I mean, Mookie Betts, he's off to a brutal start as well.
Yeah, but he's well paid.
You think?
Yeah. As for the White Sox, they dropped 2 out of 3 to the Twins. Nelson Cruz is already the MVP of the season. He just destroys the White Sox every time he plays against them.
Yeah, but the Twins can't beat the Yankees when it counts.
Yeah, well, I don't know if they'll ever get a chance to play them this year. Lucas Giolito, not good in the opener. Ronaldo Lopez, when he's on, he's great. When he's off, he's horrendous, and he was horrendous, although his shoulder was bothering him in Game 3. Dallas Keuchel was very good in between. The White Sox are going to hit. Luis Robert, you know what? I'm already looking ahead towards next season, because I don't even know what's going to happen going forward here. This kid is going to be an absolute stud for a long, long time.
Could be the best young hitter brought into the Sox organization since Frank Thomas. And is that putting it, maybe getting a little carried away with that? No, I don't think so. And we remember when Big Frank, the last year of Old Comiskey Park, was a rookie, and in fact, he hit the last home run in that park, and he hit the first one in the new park. And we knew that Frank Thomas was going to be pretty special. This kid has a chance to be the most exciting. And we've had Konerko and so many others. Jim Thome late in his career, and there have been some other terrific players on the White Sox. But what we're seeing with Louis Robert right now, he has a chance to be another Frank Thomas, maybe on a smaller scale. Coming up, we're going to hear from Andy Masur, the White Sox play-by-play guy from WGN Radio. Andy's obviously a good friend of both yourself and myself, Les, and we're looking forward to talking to Andy. And you can follow him on Twitter at Andy_Masur1. But one thing that stuck out to me, I didn't go to Saturday's game at Wrigley. I stayed at home and watched it. I'm going to be honest with you, Les. This is now in my team photo for some of the dumbest things I've ever seen in sports. Were you watching Saturday's game on Fox? Yeah, I had that game on as well as the Sox game. Okay, did you see the fake digital fans graphic that they were throwing up periodically? I did. I know why they did it. I understand. I'm not going to completely rip it. I didn't like it. I'm going to completely rip it. I didn't like it, but it was, and they came out, and I've seen so many other places like the Dodgers. They had those cutouts just like the White Sox have had. Cutouts are okay. I mean, you're sort of making fun of the situation. First of all, the ballparks are empty. That goes without saying. But for Fox to put this digital, fans in, and by the way, it was so cheaply done, to be honest with you. It looked like something, I don't know, out of creature features that back in the old days. That was a great show on GN. Dun 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 dun. Boris Karloff. It just looks so stupid. So I'm going to ask you, Les, because you and I have gone over this one over the years. Some of the dumbest thing you've ever seen in sports, because this one's in the team photo, along with the glowing hockey puck that they used to do on the broadcast back in the 90s. How about Peter Puck? That was crazy, too. Peter Puck, yeah.
Howdy, fans. Peter Puck here to lay some facts on you about hockey, the world's fastest team sport. Now, the playing time of a hockey game is 60 minutes, composed of 3 20-minute periods. On
NBC, they used to put out a folder that a lot of us got. It was a Peter Puck folder and about that thing, and NBC was actually bragging about that. Peter Puck, and that usually rhymes with something else that we shouldn't be saying here on the podcast. Luck? Not exactly luck. All right, so some of the dumbest things in sports, still the all-time dumbest thing for me in sports, was the fact that the commissioner decided, because of the dumb thing that happened in one of the All-Star games, so going forward, because that game ended in a tie. Don't get me started on that. Don't get me started on that. I am going to get you started, because that's what makes for a good podcast. But when they finally decided that the World Series home team would be decided by the All-Star game winner.
You are really dumb, for real.
To me, that is the dumbest thing that has ever happened in sports. And Bud Selig loves to brag about the fact that he started the wild card, which he did, that he started interleague play, which he did, and those have worked out okay.
Those are fine.
They've worked out fine.
Yep.
This thing about the All-Star game, and then I will give the new people that were running baseball at that point after Bud stepped aside, and they got rid of that all automatic bid into the World Series as the home field advantage team. And that was ridiculous. It was stupid at the time. It was stupid before they ever did it, and it remains stupid.
Just the fact that an all-star game that no one gives a flying
exhibition game
about, is going to determine who's the home field team in the World Series. Come on. Guy, and this, Les. We've covered all-star games over the years. Most of the players even leave before the damn game is over. I mean, the famous story was when Frank Thomas for the White Sox
in Texas in '95.
Down in Texas, and a lot of the Chicago writers wanted to talk to him, and national writers also. No, he was on a plane already on his way home by then. By the end of the game,
he said he needed to get home for a game at U.S. Cellular Field the next day, and that was ridiculous because. The Cub players that were there, they stuck around, and they had to go all the way up to Montreal, which meant, and they didn't have charter flights, so they had to connect up to Montreal for their game. So that was a bad excuse, and I like Frank. Don't get me wrong. I have a great relationship with Frank, always have had, and but I think he was wrong that day.
100%. By the way, Les, do you know what today is? Whose birthday today is? He's no longer with us. He would have been 115 years old today. The Lip?
Leo
DeRocher. What are your memories of Leo DeRocher?
He was good with the media. He was good with kids. He was great at signing autographs. The fact is, his players hated his guts. They considered him nothing but a son of a bitch, in plain and simple English. They did not like him. I remember, you've seen the movie 42, which I think was great, about Jackie Robinson. And the guy who played DeRocher with the bald head actually kind of looked like him a little bit.
I don't care if he is yellow or black or has stripes like a zebra. If Robinson can help us win, and everything I have seen says he can, then he is going to play on this ball club. Like it, lump it, make your minds up to it, because he's coming.
He was suspended by Happy Chandler for an entire year because he was finding too many ladies of the night.
Okay,
and he got caught by it.
That might be a segment on one of our upcoming podcasts. Leo DeRocher he wasn't the first manager, obviously, for the Cubs that I can remember, but he's the first memorable one. I was, the 69 season. When was his first season with the Cubs? 66?
66. They lost 103 games. Okay. He said before the year started, he says, this is not an 8th place team. He's right. They were a 10th place team.
Of course, the other thing about Leo DeRocher was when he was on with the Munsters.
I don't believe it. I never saw anything like it. I don't know whether to sign him with the Dodgers or send him to Vietnam.
You know who he hated was Jack Brickhouse and vice versa.
Really?
They despised each other.
Why
and
Brickhouse
admitted it. He went public with it. He didn't hide it. And they did not ever get along.
Okay, well, that's interesting.
In fact, when Leo got married during the 69 season, which was my senior year in high school, Leo invited everybody except Brickhouse. The other broadcasters, even Lloyd Pettit, who was not a regular play-by-play announcer, he was filled in a little bit, and Vince Lloyd, Lou Boudreau, everybody else. Brickhouse was not invited, and Jack didn't care. I mean, he said, I didn't expect to be invited, didn't want to be, but it was just a case where these two guys despised each other.
Speaking of Brickhouse, and we're going to introduce a segment on next week's podcast, because Les has got, just a treasure trove of bloopers, if you will, from over the years, and Jack Brickhouse's blooper. I'll wait until people
one
hear
of the
this
best of all time. Elia is the best. The Brickhouse one, it only lasted about maybe 25, 30 seconds.
But it's classic.
Sure was.
I mean, I've almost peed in my pants 100 times.
You hyperventilated when I first played it for you.
I'd love to give you a sneak preview, but we're going to tease you. We're going to have some of the all-time bloopers that Les has accumulated over the years. We're going to have those going forward. Lee Elia, Jack Brickhouse. I mean, so many from Tommy Lasorda, who swore. He's probably the all-time swearer.
Big time.
I have never, ever, since I've managed, ever told a pitcher to throw at anybody. And if I ever did, I certainly wouldn't make him throw at a fucking 130 hitter like LaFay or fucking Bavacqua, who couldn't hit water if he fell out of a fucking boat.
He effed us so many times. It was Bobby Knight over the years.
I got to tell you something about what was happening with Lasorda. There was one time when Jim Frey, he was still the manager of the Cubs, and he felt like the Dodgers got every break in the world. They got every call. They got every little blooper, whatever. And afterward, Jim Frey went bananas. And this was well after the Elia thing had happened, too, because Fry wasn't the manager when it happened in '83. But later on, Lasorda says, shame on him. He ought to have his mouth washed out with soap and water. And I'm thinking, talk about the pot calling the kettle midnight black. My gosh.
Absolutely. So we're going to start playing those next week. One other thing, Les, I wanted to bring up before we take a break here and we get to Andy Masur. It was a little bit later in the season. I think it was in August when you, me, and Bruce Levine, a good friend of ours also.
Bruce was there.
We all got kicked out of the Mets clubhouse. Remember?
In different orders.
Yeah, I let off the parade.
I was the first because I was...
I was the first.
We were playing that tape.
No, but I was the first.
You were the first that maybe got tossed out of there.
Yes.
But what happened was Larry Lujak kept playing that tape the next morning, and they had WLS on in the Mets locker room.
Right.
And they had gotten torched the day before. Dwight Gooden, for only like the second or third time in his career, got beat by the Cubs. And the Mets players, for the most part, thought it was hysterical, and they were laughing. Our friend Jay Horowitz, who we all became friendly with later on.
Your friend.
Well, he and I were cool down the road, but he absolutely went bananas. And when I got there, he comes up to me and goes, "You're Les, right?" I go, "Yeah." He says, "You better hope the Cubs win the pennant because you're not getting into our clubhouse ever again." And I went bananas, and I go, "You know what? Bleep you, and especially this guy over here," and I was pointing to Jack Lang, the legendary writer who's no longer alive, and he was a major league pure-blooded prick.
See, one of the best things about these podcasts, Les, is I'm getting out of you swear words that I've never heard you say in the past. So,
off the air, you've heard me use them.
Not as much as you've done here on the podcast, on the air, if you will. Anyway, that series was against the Cubs and the Mets. I think the Cubs swept those three games.
They won all four of them.
The very first game of which you were right, Dwight Gooden was pitching, and I was working for, besides, I think I was working for Sports Phone back in the day.
You were.
But I was also working for WFAN in New York, and I was getting Mets tape after the game. And I led off the parade of getting kicked out of their clubhouse. And yeah, that whole organization, and especially back in the 80s, there were
good
a bunch
old
of
KH.
jerks. Yeah, just a bunch of, Keith Hernandez. And, Keith Hernandez was the captain of the team.
A great player and a full-blooded asshole.
Yeah, he totally was. Anyway, so I had to talk to him to get some tape. I was going to talk to Dwight Gooden initially at first, but there was just too many New York writers, of which I wasn't fans of either. So I went over to Keith Hernandez, and I very politely said, "Excuse me," and I was so young at that time, "Mr. Hernandez, can I please get a couple of words with you?" And he looks at me up and down, and he sees my recorder.
He shook his head yes initially, didn't he?
I don't remember that part.
I do.
Maybe he had water on the brain. I don't know. Anyway, but he looked at me, and he, looked up and down. He sees my recorder, and he goes, "Fuck radio." So I guess he doesn't want to talk to me.
And you did a 180 turn.
I did a 180 turn, and very quietly I walked away, and I said, "God, I can't believe he said fuck radio."
And he heard you.
He had rabbit ears, and he was all over me like white on rice. And he said, "That's right, I said fuck radio, and fuck you, you little shit," and blah, 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 blah. And he was just cussing at me left and right, and Jay Horowitz sees this, and first of all, I didn't know that he was a coke freak at that point. It came out a little bit later after the fact that he was a coke fiend, and anyway, I mean, he was
not
just,
Coca-Cola either.
No, or Pepsi, and so he was just going crazy on me, and then Horowitz comes over and he goes, "You gotta get out of here, you're causing a commotion." I go, "Your fucking ball player's causing the commotion. I'm not causing any commotion, I'm here to do a job." Anyway, I got escorted out. Back in the day, the gendarmes, if you will, had those big white safari helmets, the security guys, and they did escort me out of the clubhouse. I wasn't going to fight them or anything like that. Ultimately, WFAN, to their credit, complained to the National League, and I did get a letter of apology from the NL president was former player White. What was his name? I'm terrible on names.
Bill White.
Bill White. So I did get an official letter of apology from the National League president, Bill White, and it got written up in the Sporting News, yada, yada, yada. Well, the next day, Bruce Levine had a run-in with Ed Lynch, who ultimately became the Cubs general manager.
And he became friends of his.
Yes, it became close friends, actually. But, that was the famous one where Lynch...
Without you, I haven't got a job.
Yeah.
Go fuck yourself.
So that we were 2 for 2, and then you were the coup de grace because you played the stuff on the air of everything.
Well, that was the first day.
All right, you played that thing. And so we were 3 for 3.
When Lujak heard it the first time, he was laughing his ass off, too. And he kept replaying it over and over, and it was in the Mets clubhouse. They heard it, and they were laughing. Jay heard it. He wasn't laughing.
Well, he wasn't a PR director. He was a players relations director. That's what he was over all those years.
That's what most of those guys today. That's what they are today too.
You're right, they are, and it's one thing that's always bugged me. But whatever. What we didn't know at the time, but it came out very shortly thereafter, is that Mets clubhouse. You talk about the virus going around nowadays in baseball. Cocaine and other drugs were going around some of the clubhouses, and the Mets were leaders of the pack, if you will, because so many of those players, great great players. I mean, Strawberry was a great player. Dwight Gooden was a great player.
Two of the nicest
Hernandez
guys.
was a great player.
Doc and a really good guy, and Darryl was a really good guy. People said they must have been real assholes. No, they weren't. They were nice guys to deal with. They just basically were higher than a kite.
Yeah, well, but Hernandez was not a nice guy to deal with.
No, he was not.
And to this day, he's definitely the most vile athlete I've ever dealt with.
That's saying a lot, because you and I have both dealt with some real, syphilis-infested dicks.
Okay, aptly put. All right, let's take a break here right now. When we come back, we're going to hear from Andy Masur, play-by-play for the Chicago White Sox, and still to come right after that, we're going to take some of your questions, and we have T-shirts that we're now going to be able to give away to people who are able to stump the grobber. And then we have our famous segment at the end of the podcast where we just run down some names, and Les and I give you some opinions and stories of those people. We'll be back right after this.
Hey everybody, it's Aldo Gandia here, reminding you that this week is the debut episode of Sharpshooters. Mark Shanowski and David Schuster talk Chicago Bulls. Just check for it on your Bears Barroom Radio Network podcast stream, or you can follow us on Facebook, Bears Barroom, or on Twitter at Bears Barroom, and you'll find the links there. Sharpshooters, Mark Shanowski and David Schuster talk Bulls.
And Les joining us right now is a good friend of ours, and we're both super happy for Andy Masur, who is the play-by-play voice for the Chicago White Sox. And as always, you can follow Andy on Twitter at Andy_Masur1. And Andy, how you doing, buddy?
Great, guys. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
It's our pleasure. And unfortunately, some of the news as we're recording this on Monday morning, some of the news not very good in baseball as the virus, unfortunately, is traveling through the league a little bit, or maybe more than a little bit, as the Miami Marlins have come down with it. 14 different members of the organization, I think, including 10 players, maybe more. And so who knows what's going to happen. And it's just the scary thing, as I'm sure you're well aware of.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously the elephant in the room, and nobody can really avoid it because it's not like it's gone away. And I think, Major League Baseball is doing, what it can to provide some sense of safety, I guess, with the testing situation. But, to understand this, I mean, they've never undertaken something like this. So obviously there's going to be blips in, the testing results, and I don't blame a lot of the teams that were affected early that didn't want to go out and didn't feel comfortable with their workouts. But now they're just trying to make these guys as safe as possible, and obviously traveling is not going to be an easy situation, going especially to cities that are still spiking and still have a lot of the virus in their area. I hate to see it come down to this as far as maybe not having or not continuing the season, but you have to look at the way that it's all set up here. I mean, if there's a couple of teams that get decimated by this, it's really unfair to those two cities and basically to everybody else, really, if you think about it, to really continue. And I hope it doesn't come to that, but obviously this is a bad situation for the Marlins.
Your team, obviously the White Sox, everybody was really looking forward to it. It's still, despite losing 2 or 3 to the Twins over the weekend as we speak, and let's face it, the Twins are one of the teams that they had a lot of trouble with last year, and the only team the Twins seemingly cannot beat is the Yankees. They don't want to play them if they get into the postseason, but the White Sox are an exciting team. There are so many really cool things, and you got to be very happy about that at least.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Twins are still the Twins from last year, and they can hit the ball pretty well, as we saw over the weekend at Guaranteed Rate Field. Nelson Cruz and company are continuing their onslaught, trying to create a 60-game home run record, I guess, and they're well on their way. But as far as the Sox are concerned, I mean, there are a lot of things to look forward to with this club. I mean, even if it's not this year, past into the next year as well. With Luis Robert, who hit his first big league home run yesterday. This kid's exciting. I don't even like just watching him at the plate. I like watching him play the outfield because he's got talent and natural ability to play the outfield. Great reads, great routes, a lot of speed. Those strides are really long and they cover a lot of ground. And he's able to get to a lot of balls that, frankly, even so far this year in 3 games, Darren Jackson and I were looking at each other going, wait a minute, I thought that ball was going to be in the gap, and he made it look easy. He almost overran the ball a couple of times. So he's a lot of fun to look at. And Dallas Keuchel looked really good in his first start. It's the kind of professional pitcher you love to go out and watch. And it's definitely interesting to watch these guys work because of how professional and a veteran pitcher like Keuchel is.
Yeah, White Sox pitchers, I'm sure, are happy to see Nelson Cruz go into another city because that guy has just destroyed the White Sox pitchers over the last season plus. I mean, he's the MVP of the first 3 games of the season, if you will. Keuchel was really, really good the other day. Lucas Giolito was, he started out poorly. He sort of righted the ship in the opener, and then unfortunately he went back to his first inning woes after that. It's way, way, way too early to come to any kind of conclusions. But what other conclusions the White Sox are obviously going to score some runs, and Luis Robert is incredible, and I love Jimenez at the plate right now, and I love the catching situation, Andy. Again, everything is very early as we record this, just 3 games into the season, but in spite of the 1-2 record at this juncture, I still think there's so many positives about this ball club.
Yeah, I do too, and they're not going to play the Twins every game, thankfully, because that's obviously a team that is built to compete and built to win. And the White Sox are trying to get to that. I mean, I think that the lineup is so much better this year than it was even last year and the year before that. It's much longer. It's a more deep lineup, and there's not that many. If you have the full complement of players together, there's not that many weak spots in it, which is incredible to watch. You mentioned the catching situation too. Yasmani Grandal is it's a revelation to me because I was with him his rookie year in San Diego, and all the guy could do was hit. And not a lot of the pitchers like to throw to him. They would never say that publicly, but they were intimating it privately that he was not a great catcher. And now he's made himself into not only a great hitter, but a terrific defensive catcher. I mean, one of the best in the league. And as far as framing pitches, working with pitchers, watching him go to work in spring training was something to behold because we wanted to talk to him several times before the shutdown, and he was always in a video room watching film or watching video with one of the pitchers to try to figure out what they like to do in certain situations, what their best pitches are, what their go-to pitches are, what their wipeout pitch is. And that's interesting for a guy that has obviously been around the league, but had never been around some of these players. So that was really cool to see him do that. And of course, we know what James McCann was able to do last year in his first season as really the number one catcher. He goes to the All-Star game, but he played in more games than he'd ever played in before, and you could kind of see it waning on him a little bit as the season started to come to an end. But when you look at it from top to bottom, when all the pieces are together, this is a much better lineup. It's going to score a lot more runs. I really feel like it's going to improve its on-base percentage from a year ago too, which was just above 300. I think it was 314 in all of 2019. So you got to have more people on base, obviously, when you're going to hit some home runs and score some more runs. But I like the way it's set up.
Andy, we saw a tough outing for Giolito. And, he had a rough outing, enough season 2 years ago. Last year he bounced back and he was fantastic. I still think he's going to be pretty good this year. But there have been some other pitchers that have had some rough goes of it. Some guy by the name of Shawnee, we could take a look at him out there in California. He didn't get anybody out. At least Giolito didn't have that kind of a tough outing, but I bet he can't wait to get back on the hill. Hopefully this latest issue with the virus and whatnot won't affect it because I know he wants to get back out there. And what they say is when you have a car accident, you get right back, on the car the next time and start driving. If you get thrown off a horse, you want to get right back out there and try it again.
Yeah, I don't think it was a good representation of what Lucas is going to be this year. The first pitch of the ball game that goes out of the ballpark is not a good way to start anything. He'd been so careful last year of working on the pacing, working on his breathing, working on the delivery. He relied a lot on the fastball last year, which was fine because you have to establish that early in a game anyway. But the first pitch that Kepler hit was actually a good pitch. It was bearing in on the hands, and he just dropped his hands and was able to get the barrel to it and hit it out of the ballpark in the first pitch of the game. So, Giolito last year was a revelation, a real impressive way to reform himself from what he was in 2018. Now, is he that consistent of a pitcher going forward? The jury's kind of still out because I don't know if a lot of teams were ready for what they got from him, especially after what was in 2018. So it's going to be an interesting year for not only him, but for Tim Anderson, for Yohan Moncada, for guys that really kind of broke out of things last year, to be able to, on a real small scale here, be able to pick up where they left off or improve upon where they were last year. And it's tougher conditions and tougher situations too because you didn't have as much of a lead into the season as you normally would. I mean, there were still several weeks of spring training games to play. in that competitive situation in Arizona against other teams. And then you're coming back to Chicago 4 months later, and you're playing your own team most of the time, and only have 3 exhibition games to get ready for a year. So, I don't think any of these guys will make excuses because, it is what it is. I hate that sports cliche, but it really is, because there's nothing else you could have done. And I think a lot of people just around the game are just happy that the game is being played. And we'll kind of judge this season, I think, as we get deeper into maybe even next year and the year after that.
I hate to refute Grobber, but I tend to do that a lot. I'm not getting into a car with somebody who just had an accident. I'm going to be honest with you. They can go drive by themselves. I'm not getting in that car.
What if you're thrown off a horse, though?
I'm not getting on that horse either.
Yeah, that horse is gonna run away. That's my philosophy.
Well, we're right
too.
down the road from Arlington Park, which is open. So
okay, I have no idea what that meant, but let's move on.
Well, there's horses there.
Yes, Les. I know there's horses. I don't mind. And you think you get this on the radio, Andy? You don't.
No, not at all.
Of course not. Obviously, we're both super happy for you that you got the gig with the White Sox, and you've paid your dues. My God, I mean, you did so many other things, including, of course, the stint with the Cubs and then with the Padres. I'm going to ask you, Andy, what is the common denominator doing play-by-play, which is basically the same thing no matter what? It's still baseball, but what's the common denominator doing it from team to team, and what is the difference in doing play-by-play for different teams, different organizations, different outlets?
That's the first time I've ever been asked that. That's an interesting question.
Well, that's because I'm so good at what I do.
And you're very interesting, too.
Yeah, he's also very humble, too.
Very humble.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of think that play-by-play itself is pretty much the same no matter what city you're going to be in. I think the biggest thing is to make sure that you really immerse yourself in the culture of that team, the history of that team, and really come off knowledgeable, because fans will figure it out quickly if you're not. So I think the same kind of homework has to go into it, whether I'm working for the Cubs, the Padres, or the White Sox. I mean, luckily for me, growing up in the city, I grew up on the north side and was there a lot more than I was on the south side. But, obviously with the team in the same city, pretty much what the history is of both clubs, which is nice, so that I have at least that working knowledge going in. And the other thing too is just it kind of depends on who your analyst is. And in Chicago on the north side, I was only doing a very few, like a half an inning of play-by-play with Ron Santo, and the goal there was just to make him laugh and just to have a little fun, because that was just the kind of concept that was there. I mean, Ron was an icon with Cubs fans, and you treat icons with the respect that they deserve, and Ronnie was a friend, and it was easy to do. So that wasn't really a big problem. Going to San Diego when I didn't know anybody, and I had never really been around the Padres, and growing up on the north side, it was a city that I didn't really like from 1984 situations. But
welcome to that club.
It was interesting going there. Again, not knowing a soul, and trying to acclimate myself into a booth that had two gentlemen that were there combined 65 years, I believe, at that point, and Jerry Coleman, the late Jerry Coleman, and Ted Leitner, who's still working there. So it was kind of a make sure that you show your reverence to these guys, because the fans love these guys. You're the new guy. Less is more, I think, in that case. And I think that I didn't really give them a lot in 2007 when I was there, because I was trying to acclimate myself. And I heard about it, trust me, from the fans, and I heard about it from some people in management. And I decided that in 2008 it was just going to be me. I just had to be. I just like to have fun on the air. I like to insert some personality, some sarcasm, some wit, and I like to bounce things back off people. I just like talking baseball. So when you get to a situation now that I'm in with Darren Jackson, I can do that, because DJ loves to talk baseball, and I can sit there and ask him questions, or just run things by him for 9 innings, and I think it would be entertaining, because his takes on baseball are really good. Luckily for us, we got off on a really good foot when the radio station got the contract, and he and I would talk all the time on the field. And it wouldn't even be about baseball sometimes. It would just be about broadcasting or philosophies and how to deal with certain players or all players when you're in the position that we are. And then we talked some ball. And luckily, we had some friends in common from San Diego. We shared the late Tony Gwynn in common, which is somebody that he and I could probably talk about for hours and hours and hours, and not even think we're talking about him for hours, because Tony was such an influence on both of us. So, so I think that to answer your question, I think that the play-by-play is the same. The baseball is the same. You give it the same enthusiasm when your team is winning. You give it the proper respect when they're not. You try to keep fans informed. You try to be very accurate on what you're talking about as far as the facts of the game, and you just try to be very descriptive on where the ball is and make sure everybody's understanding what the score is, what the inning is, what the situation is. So I think it doesn't change in that respect. It just kind of changes, philosophy-wise, and having to learn the organizations when you go to different places.
God rest his soul. Ron Santo was such a good friend to all three of us, myself, yourself, and Les. I mean, I used to love talking, and Ronnie had so many good stories, and they weren't always just about baseball. I mean, he was in the oil business. A lot of people don't know that, and he was such a, an interesting person, obviously very passionate about the Cubs and baseball, but you were with him also, Andy, off the field as well, and I'm wondering if you can recite any stories, and were you there at Shea Stadium that day when his hairpiece caught on fire? Were you there that day? I think you were.
Yep, sure. I was about 5 feet away from it.
Go ahead, tell the story.
I think myself and Matt Bolts were both looking at each other. Matt was our producer engineer at the time, and it smelled like there was a tire fire somewhere around the ballpark. And if you're nobody's familiar with, you guys are familiar with Shea, but if your listeners aren't, the booth was terrible. I mean, it was pitched forward, so the height of the ceiling was in the back of the room, and it got lower as you got to the front. So Pat and Ron were in the front, and there was a space heater that probably dangled about 2 feet from the ceiling. And when Ronnie stood up for the national anthem, he didn't realize it, and we didn't realize it at the time, but his hairpiece was right on the heater. And it actually did start to smoke a little bit. It was, Pat had a cup of water that we put on top of it. And the next thing you know, Ronnie's walking out of the booth, and he goes to the restroom at Shea Stadium and comes back. He tried to put a little water on it, try to make it look good, because Ronnie wanted to look good. He was one of those guys that was really concerned about how he looked. And when he came back, it really looked like Tiger Woods had gone to the practice fairway, taken a 7-iron with a divot, and didn't replace the divot. And that's what it looked like on the top of Ronnie's head, because it was sloped in because where the smoke had come and the heat had kind of melted things, and the water didn't really help it. But he hated Shea Stadium anyway, and it was one of those times.
He hated New York, period. He hated New York totally.
Yeah, he didn't like it at all. And that was the beginning of the 2003 season. That was the second game of the year after the Cubs won that first game, the Corey Patterson game, in the first game of the year. There was a day off, and that game was at night. And, he's thinking, okay, well, maybe New York is turning for me. The elevator showed up on time. The elevator at Shea Stadium was notoriously the slowest thing in the world. And they actually mentioned Ronnie in the pregame notes on the field. They pointed up to the booth, welcoming him back to Shea Stadium. And he was like, okay, great. I want to get out. I want to get out of here. I don't want to get out of here alive. So, that was one of them. I mean, I was around his hairpiece more than anybody, probably, maybe even than his family. The best one, I mean, I only saw him without the hairpiece 2 times. They were both in St. Louis. One time he had called my room, and normally I would have a room that was very close, if not right next door to his. And he asked me if I had brought a baseball hat with me on the trip, and I always had a baseball hat with me in my bag, and I brought him over to him. He answered the door without it. That was the first time I ever saw him. I was like, whoa. I'm like, who is this guy?
Trick or treat.
Yeah, and of course he didn't like any of the hats I had. And he decided that he was just going to wear his number 3 the hairpiece, the Gamer, which was usually only worn with a hat. He decided to wear it without one. And that was the first time. And the second time in St. Louis was when he called me in a panic because he couldn't find the hairpiece.
Oh, God.
So we were in his room tearing it up from floor to ceiling. I mean, we looked in the shower, we looked in all the dresser drawers, we took the sheets off the bed, I looked underneath the bed, and then he got a phone call, and it was from his grandson. So he was taking the phone call, and he was sitting in a chair right by the bed, and I wandered over to the desk where the Cubs had sent him some photos to sign for a giveaway on the next homestand. And there was a Federal Express box that was kind of sitting on the desk on a stack of papers, and I just decided to go through the papers, and I picked up the Federal Express box and attached to it with the tape from the box and the tape from the hairpiece looked like a dead skunk. And I picked this box up, and there's his hairpiece at the bottom of it. And he's motioning for me to come over there to take it off and give it to him. I'm like, no, I brought him the box. I wasn't touching that thing. And he was laughing. He couldn't stop laughing about it. And he was, you guys are so right. He was such a fun person to be around.
He really was.
He didn't take himself all that seriously when it came to being on the air and talking about the game. I'll never forget the game we were playing Milwaukee at home, and Ruben Quevedo was pitching for the Brewers, and the Cubs had Quevedo before. So he's looking at Quevedo out there on the mound and saying, Pat, this guy reminds me of somebody, and blah blah blah. And he's going on and on and on about it. And Pat is like, well, we used to have him here, and no, that's not it. And he kept talking and talking. And this is the early days of the internet, and I'm sitting in the back of the booth trying to Google or whatever, Yahoo or whatever it was at the time, to try to figure this thing out. And literally an inning later, I see him kind of slumped over, and you heard him on the air go, ugh, one of those patented, ugh. And Pat goes, well, Ron, what's wrong? And he goes, I just realized, Pat, this is the same guy. And, it just kind of came back to him, and he was laughing about it. We laughed about it for 3 innings. And it was just one of those things to be around him. You never knew what was going to happen that day. You never knew what was going to happen when he answered a fax on the air. It's truth be told, and I guess we can tell it now, but Matt Bolts and I used to make up a lot of the ones on the road because we didn't have a lot of faxes we would take on the road with us, and we made a lot of them up just to see what we could get out of them. And it was entertaining. It was entertaining for us. It was entertaining for the audience. And I miss that guy every day. I mean, I feel so fortunate to have crossed paths with him, and to show you the impact that he had. One of the first times I've ever seen my father in awe was the first time he met Ron. And to me, it was Ronnie. He was just Ronnie. He was the guy that I worked with in the booth. Yeah, he played baseball. He was a pretty good baseball player, And, my dad, knew of him as a player and would never think that he'd ever get a chance to meet the guy. And the first time he came up to the booth in 1999, and Ronnie was so nice to him, and it was always really great to my family. And my dad was just kind of was speechless and didn't really have a lot to say. And I knew at that point that this was something special I was involved with. And, and Ronnie, to this day, to me, and it's really funny. I hate to keep running on about this, but, between him and Ed Farmer, and who I got a chance to know too with the White Sox, those two guys reminded me, they had a lot of similar qualities. And what I mean by that is they both were afflicted with things that they never had any control over. They never complained outwardly about their situations ever. They were great to people from the outside. They were great to their fans. They were great to just good human beings. And they were both very generous human beings. And it was really interesting to me because in 2005, the Cubs and the White Sox played one of their interleague games, and it was a really hot day at it was then U.S. Cellular Field. And Ronnie, with the diabetes, we really had to keep an eye on him when it was hot. So we basically had to sometimes pack him in, with coolers in the back of his neck, with a wet towel. And I'll never forget Ed Farmer coming over, making sure that Ronnie was taken care of, and making sure that Ronnie had a Coke in case he needed it for a diabetic incident, making sure he had a candy bar, making sure that he had water, making sure that we had food in the booth. And I thought to myself, you know what, this guy is working for the other team, first of all. They probably faced each other at some point or another during their careers. But this guy was going out of his way to make sure that the visiting broadcaster, in this case Santo and Hughes, were well taken care of. And I never forgot that. And I actually mentioned that to Ed when we got the contract, and I met him officially met him for the first time. And I told him, I said, that really meant a lot to me. I know it meant a lot to Ronnie. I said, but as somebody that was friends with Ron Santo at the time, I said, you were just absolutely amazing. And I really have never gotten a chance to properly tell you how much I appreciated that and to thank you for it. And he kind of looked at me as if to say, that's what I do. That's kind of who I am. And I've told people this, that Ed Farmer, and you guys know Ed, you guys knew Ed well as well.
Sure.
But the kind of person that would give you the shirt off his back and then in the same moment be pissed at you for not asking for the shirt because you really wanted to give it to you. And I enjoyed my time with all these guys. I mean, it was just, I feel so fortunate to have gone through games in baseball with guys like Santo, guys like Ed Farmer, Darren Jackson, Tony Gwynn, Colonel Jerry Coleman, Ted Leitner. I mean, I pinch myself because these are guys that you don't meet in everyday life.
Andy, before we let you get going, you know about the black cat from 1969. You probably weren't around yet. I don't even think David was either. I was 17 years old, and we know about somebody threw a black cat. If you've been to Citi Field, obviously, where the Mets play now, and they've got all those pictures. They're like blocks on there. Have you ever seen the one? They have a picture of Ron standing there with the black cat going by him, and I would imagine he's seen that picture more times than he wanted to admit.
Yeah, that was not good. And I think that Citi Field might have been only open for 1 year, Ronnie's last year of broadcasting. Maybe it was 2 years. Cause I think it opened in 2009. Because the Padres.
It was 2009. You're correct.
Yeah, we opened up the stadium. Jody Garrett, the Chicago kid, hit a home run on the first bat at the ballpark. I wasn't with him at the time, but I have to imagine that anything New York, anything that would dig at the Cubs for him in Mets colors or whatever probably didn't sit very well with him. I always thought to myself, when we got a tour of the ballpark before the first game, and you could stand up on the third base concourse and look out and see Shea Stadium in rubble. And I just kept thinking to myself, all Ronnie would say is, "Hey, Shea Stadium, rest in pieces," And he was probably so tickled to see that stadium down that he probably didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it, but I'm sure in the back of his mind he was not real thrilled about even being in New York, period, as we talked about earlier.
Hey, Andy, we greatly appreciate your time. We're hopeful that the baseball season continues for all 60 games. We're proud of you, Les and I, and so many other people proud of you for the job that you're doing, and wish you all the best. Next time we have you, I got to ask you, because I think we were all up in Milwaukee the day that Brant Brown dropped the fly ball, and that's another
I was
another
in the
story.
Remember that booth? I was on the moon deck right in front of the radio booth, and when the ball was hit in the air, I'm standing up and I'm thinking, all right, I'm ready to go downstairs. It would have given them 2 wins in a row over the Brewers as they head to Houston, and all of a sudden it's dropped. And all I said was, "Oh," and you know what came after that. And when
shit!
Yeah, and we heard Ronnie in the background just screaming, and everybody knows about that particular soundbite. And Pat is just stunned as well. And that was the last memory I really had of County Stadium, other than the last game that they played there. And I still can't believe that Brant Brown, who had a pretty good glove, that he dropped that ball, and Ronnie was like flabbergasted.
Oh, flabbergasted is the understatement of the millennium here. I mean, it's just and Pat tells the story too, because I was on the road at that point. So Pat tells the story too about Jim Riggleman, the manager of the Cubs, after this tough loss, consoling Ronnie in the clubhouse.
Yeah,
I mean, that's how much this guy lived and breathed Cubs baseball. And you got the manager of the club that just dropped this heartbreaking game as they're trying to fight for the playoffs, consoling the broadcaster that used to play for the team. It's going to be okay. We still have some games left. I mean, that to me is one of the funniest things, and the most comical results of what happened there. And obviously, we know that they got in, and the Braves took care of them pretty quickly. But that whole season, Ronnie had never experienced as a broadcaster, never experienced the playoffs. So, because he started after '89, he was around the club in '84, but was never really in any official capacity. And he was so excited, and I'll never forget how excited he was when the Cubs clinched on a doubleheader victory against the Pirates in 2003. The long whistle and clap, Pat luckily just kind of laid out so that everybody could hear Ronnie just do Ronnie's thing, and. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, I do remember because when he dropped it, I think it was like the 8th or 9th inning. I can't remember.
It was the 9th.
9th inning. Okay.
It was the 9th. Yeah.
It ended the game.
Walk off.
Okay, that's right. Anyway, I didn't hear the call obviously because we were ready to go down into the clubhouse that day, and I didn't hear the call until we got into the car and they were playing it on the post game. I got to be honest with you, I was laughing my ass off from Milwaukee all the way into the Broad Stop where we stopped and had a couple of belts on the way home. That must have been a good 45 minutes. I was crying. I was laughing so hard. It is one of the funniest things of all time. I'm sure we're going to play this right here on the podcast right after this. But, it was just a memorable moment. And again, wrapping it up. I mean, he was such a good guy. And so are you, Andy. And we do greatly appreciate and wish you all the best going forward, buddy.
Well, thanks, guys. You guys have always been great with me and great to me as I've kind of moved along through this business. And you guys are two guys that I really like being around. So be around a little bit more. I mean, I know this is the COVID thing, and we can stand 6 feet apart and still say hello.
Well, with less, it's 8.
I was going to say 12,
wish.
That's okay.
You wish.
Yeah, another great comeback. All right, Andy, appreciate it, and I'll talk to you shortly. Thanks again, Andy.
Sounds good, guys. Take care.
All right, you too.
Hey, it's Aldo with another quick programming note. This Thursday, it is Draft on Tap with Ryan Badgley and Danny Shimon. The two of them will start getting you ready for the upcoming 2021 draft. That is right, 2021 draft. We're already talking about it. We need to scout who these players are. We need to know who they are so that way we can be totally prepared for that draft. And who knows, it could be the only football that we'll be talking about this fall. You never know what is going to happen with this pandemic. Nonetheless, we'll be talking football, and we'll be doing it on Thursday with Danny Shimon and Ryan Badgley getting you ready for the upcoming draft.
And welcome back, and we do appreciate hearing from Andy Masur. Andy with some great stories about
He's one of the
Ron
best,
Santo.
isn't he?
Well, he's a good friend of ours, and I'm so happy for him that he's doing what he has wanted to do. He had a bad breakout in San Diego because he was doing a good job out there, and new ownership came in, and they screwed him over royally. And then, he went back and he earned his dues yet again, and now he's play-by-play for the Chicago White Sox. And listen, I hope he's there on the South Side for a long, long time.
I do too, no question.
All right, Les, this is our time now for our segment where we take some questions from the listeners, and the number they can call at any point during the week is 224-202-6234. And now, if they're able to stump you, Les, and that's not so easy, of course, but if they're able to stump you with a question, we will have T-shirts going forward, and this is the Grobstein Schuster Zone T-shirt, of which you and Kathy will be recipients of a little bit later today. But again, if you're able to stump the grobber, again, the number 224-202-6234, you will get a T-shirt. So Aldo's got one already queued up, and we're going to play it here right now.
Roster, which Chicago team drafted Carlton?
All right, now that one didn't come through, Les, so we're not really sure what that guy wanted to know, but it sounded like what Chicago team drafted Carlton, and then he couldn't finish the thought. And so Aldo and I thought maybe it was Carlton from the old Rhoda TV show, who was the elevator guy.
Hello, this is Carlton, your doorman.
Yeah, Carlton, what's the idea of letting Lenny in when I wasn't here?
But he said he loved you. We don't get many of those.
Well, Steve Carlton, who was not a nice guy either.
Oh, he was with the White Sox at the end.
Yes, he was.
Oh,
and
is he a prick?
One day, he was outside the White Sox clubhouse. He came out on 35th Street, I'm sorry. And a fan says, "Mr. Carlton, could I have your autograph?" And he was a prick about it, and he said no. And the guy called him a couple of names, and he started chasing him down Shields Avenue. North down Shields Avenue. And Carlton was actually chasing the guy.
He never caught me.
Carlton was chasing him, and again, it was pretty nasty.
Now, to Steve Carlton's credit, and he did finish. Well, I don't know if he finished with the White Sox, but he was, he had a cup of coffee at the end of his career with the White Sox. The White Sox had so many players at the end of their careers. I mean, George Foster was there, Jose Canseco was there. Who else am I? Manny Ramirez, what a prick he was. He was there with the White Sox at the end of his career.
I got him though in Milwaukee the last day or two that he's still with the Dodgers. And he wasn't talking to anybody, but I got him to kind of wink at me. I said, "You're coming to Chicago, aren't you?" And he kind of winked and all. And that's when I went on the air with McNeil and Boers. And I said, "He's coming to Chicago. He will be here shortly." The next day, he was with the White Sox.
Okay, now, Steve Carlton, to his credit, I will say this, had one of the great seasons of all time pitching. He won the Cy Young.
1972.
He won 27 games, and the Phillies only won 54. So he accounted for 50% of the team's victories that season.
And every time he faced the Cubs, he got killed.
Yeah.
I mean, he killed the Cubs is what I meant.
Well, he had such a great slider. I mean, left-handed hitters could not hit Steve Carlton in his prime. They just couldn't touch him.
And it started when he was still with the Cardinals before he was traded for Rick Wise. Cubs couldn't hit him then either.
Well, anyway, so Steve Carlton was the answer to that question. But we don't know what he's talking about. You know, what Chicago team drafted Carlton? Is there
Carlton Fisk wasn't drafted by the Chicago team.
No, he was with the Red Sox initially.
He signed with the White Sox, obviously, as a free agent.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. So maybe that
was in '81.
Anyway, the guy couldn't finish his thought, so we figured we'd have some fun with that. Is there any other, Aldo?
It's not a stump the grobber, but it's a question for the grobber.
Oh, okay. You owe me money?
Hey guys, Brian Burr Ridge again. This isn't the stump Les, but going back to Les getting into what was determined as a tiff with John Rooney, which absolutely wasn't true.
Never happened. That's complete bullshit.
I did hear on Boris and Bernstein in the mid to late '90s something about Les and Marty Brennaman not getting along in the
bullshit
lunchroom or whatever food room. I don't believe it. I just love for Les to clear that up. Thanks, guys. Wonderful show.
First of all, Marty Brennaman and I are good friends, and we have been since 1975 when the Reds were just a dynamite team. And that was when I covered that World Series, the first World Series I ever covered, when they defeated the Red Sox in 7 games, and Fisk hit the foul pole and all the rest of that stuff. Marty Brennaman and Tommy, his son, I've gotten along great with both of those guys and they're both terrific guys.
Marty Brennaman, who had his last season last year with the Reds after so many years, and when he came to Wrigley Field, I think it was the second to last time the Reds came in, he gave me such a nice, warm interview, and I asked him one of the things, I go, so what are you going to do now? I mean, you've been doing baseball for like 50 years or something like that. He goes, well, I married a woman 30 years younger than I am. I go, okay, you'll be busy. You don't have to worry about anything. She'll keep you busy.
Great comeback. Quick question I'm going to ask you.
Yeah.
Who was the Reds play-by-play announcer on radio before Marty Brennaman?
Oh, boy. I don't know.
I'll give you a small hint.
The grubber stumped me. I have to give you my T-shirt off my back.
Think hockey.
Think hockey. Think hockey. Well, you got to go back like 50-plus years.
No, think the Miracle on Ice.
Oh,
Al Michaels.
Al Michaels.
He was the voice of the Reds. Then he gave it up because he went out to California and he became the voice of the Giants for a while.
Okay.
And Marty Brennaman became the voice of the Reds, and the rest is history.
All right, maybe next week we'll go over some of the broadcasters that you and I've done stats on NBA broadcasts over the years, so I've worked with almost every NBA announcer, but I've also dealt with a lot of baseball and football announcers.
I got one for you. Yep. Who was the first NBA announcer that I ever did not play-by-play, but color with, and also I did some stuff on the side, and I kept stats, and I was doing stuff like that for him. Who was it?
Eddie Doucette?
How about Brent Musburger?
Oh, Brent.
During the days that he was the voice of CBS Radio. And in Chicago, Milwaukee, Detroit, and other places in the Midwest, I got to work a lot of games with Brent.
Well, Brent, of course, was one of the original voices doing sports on WBBM 100 years ago.
The Musburger-Palmer Sports Report. He worked with Brad Palmer.
Yep. All right, so those are some of the famous names. All right, here we come now to the segment, Les, where I throw out some names and you give us your story. I'll give you my story. We'll recite whatever memories we have, and we're going to start with a man who is back in the NBA, signing a 5-year contract with the New York Knicks, Tom Thibodeau.
I got along with him. I'm assuming you did too. There were people within the Bulls organization that to this very day hate his guts, did not get along with him. It was not made public, but it's a fact. And Thibs had enough of his players hated him. When he went to Minnesota, there were enough key players that hated him too, and he got fired after only 2 seasons with the Timberwolves. Thibs was a miserable coach as far as in clutch games. He was good in the regular season, and Spoelstra badly outcoached him in that first play, and that only playoff series, because the next year was when Derrick Rose blew out his knee, and they did not meet Miami that year. But the Bulls were the number one. They were number one key pick in that situation, and they ended up winning Game 1. And from that point on, Spoelstra outcoached Thibs, and that was pathetic.
All right, a bunch of things come to mind when I talk about Tom Thibodeau. And yes, I did get along with him because I've been covering Bulls, for 40-plus years. So Tom Thibodeau, he was a really good coach. I mean, he worked really hard. He was very passionate about his craft. A lot of the Bulls players liked him a lot. One of the things about Tom Thibodeau... A lot of them didn't,
too.
Well, honestly, I can't recall anybody who stood out who didn't like him, to be honest with you, Les. I was around the team every day. Maybe up in Minnesota, they didn't feel... Listen, they know that he was a little hard on them, and whether practicing too hard or whatever, but... he cared about them. So I don't know if anybody really didn't like him, like you're, saying here. But he
Gar Forman sure didn't.
Did Gar Forman like him or not?
He helped fire him.
Well, yeah, there's a long story involved that. We'll save that for another time. But anyway, Tom Thibodeau, very passionate about the game. A bunch of things about Tom Thibodeau, though. You knew that he was very secretive. In his very first game, it was a preseason game, and it's like 6:45, and the tip-off is at 7:30, and we're asking him out in the hallway, can you give us your starting lineup? He wouldn't do it. Okay, so he was setting the tone right then and there. In the very first preseason game, you're not even going to tell us who your starting lineup is? Wow, you're a little off your rocker when it comes to that kind of stuff. But also, he made a lot of players money, especially point guards. I mean, they got contracts because Tom Thibodeau, just got them to perform.
How rich did he make Robinson?
He made a lot of people a lot of money, him included. But two other things about Tom Thibodeau. First of all, as passionate as he was about basketball, and he was just as passionate about eating. He loved going out to restaurants. He wined and dined at almost probably every good restaurant downtown Chicago. He was a foodie, if you will.
Probably because he got freebies.
Well, no doubt. A lot of people do in sports. And then ultimately, one of the other things that I unfortunately remember is he didn't get Derrick Rose out of that playoff game against Philadelphia. He should never have been in that game, and I'll tell you why, Les, and I'll argue with anybody about this.
And so will I.
Okay, so we're in agreement for once. But, the Bulls are up like 12 with, I don't know, a very short amount of time.
Doug had pulled all his players off the floor.
Doug had pulled all his players off the court. Derrick that season had 5 different injuries, okay? You do not take a chance in that situation with your franchise player. So that was such a major mistake. And I'm not second-guessing because when he was still in the game, I was at courtside going, get him out of the game. That's what you do. You don't leave your franchise players in games that are already won. Sure enough, he went down. Yes, and people said, well, he could have blown out his knee, in the shower after the game. Yeah, that's true. He could have, but he didn't. He was in the game, and he shouldn't have been in the game. So that was my story. Overall, I like Tom Thibodeau a lot. Do your job. I mean, he gave us so many sound bites over the years. It was priceless.
Kind of sounds a little bit like a couple of hockey coaches we've seen in the past, again, going back to 1980, Miracle on Ice. Play your game. Play your game.
All right, our next name, Les, Jim Fregosi.
I got along with Jimmy all right. There were a couple times that he had a couple of comments for me. One time I was interviewing some players, and Fregosi walked by, and he said something with the F word, well, fuck this, fuck that, blah, 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 blah. And I said, as we continued to talk, I said, little does he know, I'm going to go ahead and play that. In other words, I'll bleep it out. And he heard me, and he says, little do you know, I don't give a shit. And from that point on, we were fine. We were fine. And a lot of the media people, as he was about to get fired by Larry Himes, defended him, and they wanted to see him get a break and all, but Himes was going to get rid of him no matter what.
Jim, unfortunately, has passed on. God rest his soul. Jim Fregosi was a man's man. He was one of the first White Sox managers that I ever dealt with, and I used to love after the game. He would actually, even after our questions after the game, he would just say, "Oh, sit down, guys. You want to talk about anything else?" And we would, and he would cajole us with stories and answer any of our questions, even off the record. And I used to love that. And when he became a scout later on, and he would come in, I mean, he would be like the Pied Piper. His stories were incredible. Another thing about Jim Fregosi, and he was obviously a pretty damn good player back in his day.
He was an all-star with the Angels.
Yes, he was. But even as much as that, Les, he may have been the best athlete ever. ever, and that's saying a lot to come out of the state of California. There's a famous story about Jim Fregosi where, he was like an all-sport player, okay? He played football, he played baseball, he played basketball, he was track and field. He was at a state, I think it was a state meet, and he was running like the 400 hurdles or something like that, and he won or finished second in that. Then he went and played a baseball game and hit 2 home runs for the same high school in the same day.
I'll name somebody, though, from California that was a better overall athlete than him.
Go ahead.
Jackie Robinson.
Jackie Robinson, well, that's a good argument.
And he was in more than one sport out there, too.
Okay, well, take a look at Jim Fregosi's high school accomplishments. I think you'll be impressed. Anyway, Jim Fregosi was such a good person. It was sad when, unfortunately, he finally passed away a few years back. He was really one of my favorites of all time. All right, Les, I tell you every now and then I throw in a venue. You and I have been into this building a bunch of times, Madison Square Garden.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I got to call some games in there. I did some Sky games in there. I got to call an MISL All-Star game in Madison Square Garden, too, among others. Covered a lot of Knicks games there, certainly games against the Bulls. The legendary one, in a good way, was 1993 when you ended up seeing Horace Grant and Scottie Pippen rejecting layup after layup after layup, and eventually Michael Jordan said, that's enough, pulled it down, found B.J. Armstrong on a layup, and he put it in right as the buzzer was sounding, so they ended up winning the game by 3 instead of by 1. And the expression on those Knicks fans' face, they hadn't lost a game at the Garden for like almost 3 months. They had that good of a string going. And those fans were stunned, and they knew they were never going to see that team again because they knew they had no chance of winning a game at Chicago Stadium. And as cocky and as arrogant as Pat Riley was, I think he knew when they came to Chicago that the next year was the infamous Hugh Hollins game. And everybody there says, well, that's revenge for last year. And that was a terrible call. And people could say you're being biased. No, that was a terrible call that was made on Pippen, which put Hubert Davis at the free throw line. That was bad.
All right, Madison Square Garden for me, it's been refurbished so many times, I've lost track.
Sure has.
How many times. But, and I wasn't impressed a couple times that I was in the building. I mean, it was sort of danky, if you will, if that's a word even. And the food that they fed the media was among the worst I've ever seen or tasted. That was god-awful. But you and I were in the building specifically one time. That's when we were covering the Bears-Patriots game, and we were at a Madison Square Garden game with the Bulls and the Knicks. Do you remember this?
Yes, that was in 06. And we covered, we went in there and we went to the Garden, and then we took a bus ride overnight up to
That's right.
Foxborough, actually.
Right.
But first we went to Boston, and we stayed in Foxborough, and then the Bears ended up playing the Patriots the next day. And that was the third straight week we were out that way because they had played in New York consecutive weeks. They had played the Giants, and then the next week, same arena, same stadium, they ended up playing the Jets. And then they played the Patriots after that. 3 weeks in a row, of course, the only game they lost was the Patriots. And it was a close game. They didn't get blown out that time.
All right, so that game that you and I went to at Madison Square Garden before we went to the Bears-Patriots game.
Post-game.
Well, yeah, this is the game where Ben Wallace, tore off the headband.
He wore the headset even though...
headband.
Right. He wore it even though the coach...
Scott Skiles.
Skiles didn't want to do it, and Skiles intentionally got himself kicked out early in the third quarter.
But they had a big to-do... maybe in the hallway, I don't even know. So we had to wait like forever to get into the locker room.
45 minutes.
Yep. So that was one of the things standing out. I've been at Madison Square Garden a couple of other times. I mean, I saw Woody Allen, I saw Spike Lee, I saw some other people also. So, I mean, it is a haven for celebrities from New York to go, even though the Knicks have sucked over the years. There's been a haven of athletes, of VIPs that have been in attendance. All right, Les, one last one, and this is near and dear to you, so I did this special just for you. Larry Lujack, Tommy Edwards.
Wow. I got to work with both of them.
Yeah.
I knew Tommy before I worked at WLS when he was the PA announcer of the Bulls initially in 1976-77. And he took over for Red Motlow as the PA announcer and continued to do it till he decided to take a job first in Boston and then out in Los Angeles. And he was with Aero 93 out there, and he helped me get do a couple of shows from out there when I was working for The Score originally, the first time. And got to work with both of those guys between October of 79 through the end of 1989, and I had a blast. And one day, Tommy was on vacation, and Larry sees me in the hallway and says, "You want to do animal stories today?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" So I got to actually do animal stories with him one time, and that was a blast. And played a lot of basketball with those guys, some softball, stuff like that. And when we played in against the Morris, Illinois Police Department, they had about 4,500 seats in there. When we announced that we were going to have that one-on-one game between me and Lou Jack, which, again, Aldo someday can play that here. But the bottom line is that place sold out in about one day, 24 hours after we announced that there were going to be a game between me and Lou Jack at halftime. And it was fun. One of these days we will play it right here on the Grobstein Schuster Zone.
I'll look forward to that. I didn't know Larry Lujak. I think I met him at one of our softball games. I think I saw him on the side there. I was in awe, because he was a giant in broadcasting.
Huge.
And he had just a giant persona about him. So I didn't know Larry Lujak. I got to know Tommy Edwards. I still do, obviously, over the years through the Bulls, of course, because Tommy has been the PA announcer at the Chicago Stadium, and then
at the UC too.
At the UC at the United Center. So Tommy and I have become fairly close friends over the years. He's just one of my favorite guys. He's a longtime radio guy.
I know
also.
Tommy and his lovely wife Mary Lou very well.
Yep. Really, really, really good people. Anyway, Les, you're good people, and we
try.
We have a couple of T-shirts as a parting gift for you today.
Why not? My name's on one of them, on both of them actually, and. I know Kathy would like one, and she's going to have a good time with that particular thing as well.
All right, so we're previewing next week. We're going to have some of the all-time bloopers. Folks, you want to stay tuned to that, because I'm telling you, I've been laughing at some of these bloopers over all these years, and I know people will enjoy those
30
as well.
plus years or so, maybe more.
Almost 40. Hey, Les, you have a good week, and I'll talk to you shortly.
And let's hope that everything works out well with baseball.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody.